Good afternoon. This is Richard Idland from Business for America. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for a webinar on the Time to Vote initiative, which is a national nonpartisan effort for companies to encourage their employees to participate in the election in November. And we have a really great all-star cast of companies today that have been participating in Time to Vote. And they're going to be taking turns and describing how their companies have adopted practices that have resulted in higher turnout and also brought a lot of important education to employees about how the Time to Vote initiative works and how that helps to improve our representative democracy. Before we go any further, let me introduce the founder of Business for America, Sarah Bonk, who goes by the name of Bonk. And she wants to tell you a little bit about Business for America, our work, and then our partnership with the Time to Vote initiative. So Bonk, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Richard. And thanks to everybody for joining us, both our panelists and our guests today. I just want to give you a quick little bit of background. I worked at Apple for almost 15 years. So I was a corporate person like our panelists today. And while I was there, like the majority of Americans, I was concerned about the state of our representative democracy. And so I started to volunteer, and really it was pro bono consulting in my spare time for a number of different nonpartisan grassroots organizations that were working toward political reform and boosting the voice of individual voters. While I was doing that work and working with a number of organizations, there was this narrative that I heard very often about how the business community and capitalism were causing harm to our democracy. And in fact, at one point, I even received a report that said, corporations are the enemy. And there I was working at Apple, who is supposedly the enemy, and I really felt that there was another story there to tell, because when our representative democracy isn't functioning well, it's not only bad for everyone living in the country, but it's bad for businesses themselves. So in this idea that democracy is good for business is something we need to hear more often. In fact, some reports have come out since I was doing that work showing that dysfunctional government is the #1 obstacle to economic competitiveness. In fact, in my view, looking at it as a broader picture, the interests of the public and the business interests are aligned in having a well-functioning democracy. And that's why I founded Business for America, to elevate that narrative and bring that conversation to the table. We think it's time for the business community to provide nonpartisan leadership toward improving the health of democracy, and Time to Vote is one big part of that. The business community is providing leadership on so many issues that we're facing as a nation right now. This has been reflected in the movement toward purpose-driven businesses and corporate social responsibility. You may have seen the statement from the Business Roundtable. They issued a statement basically saying that businesses don't exist merely to serve shareholders. There's a wider embracing of stakeholder capitalism and giving back to the communities in which we operate. We can do good while doing well. And part of our vision here is to take that corporate social responsibility that more people are talking about and more businesses are embracing, and expanding it to also include corporate civic responsibility. The business community can do for voter participation and election and democracy what it's already doing in a lot of other issue areas. It may be still a radical idea to some people that business has any standing to weigh in on this issue. It may be counterintuitive when business is taking so much heat, when business is taking the blame, to say that we have a right and an ability to do something positive here. But of course, we think that we can do something positive, and we've got some pretty good evidence of that. So we see companies are ready to take a leadership role in promoting the health of democracy, amplifying the voices of individual voters, especially our employees and our communities where we operate. Time to Vote is proof of that. And for the companies that we're talking to today, thanks for joining us, and thanks for thinking about being part of this initiative. We want to show you the many benefits of getting involved, and the ways that getting involved in the civic health of your community and boosting the voices of your employees, as well as your other stakeholders like customers and investors, that this just, in the way of a rising tide lifts all boats, is a positive for everyone involved. So we see Time to Vote as the most obvious and simplest entry point, but of course there's more that business can do to improve the health of our democracy overall. We're going to be working with our members and partners and on a number of initiatives to catalyze the business community on this issue. And so excited to work with Patagonia, Levi, Strauss, and PayPal to help promote Time to Vote. We've got more plans in store, and it's shaping up to be an exciting and busy 2020. So we hope you'll all stay in touch with us. So thank you, and back to you, Richard.
Okay, good, thank you. Great, so let me introduce our speakers. JJ Huggins from Patagonia is in the Public Relations and Communications office there. Then JJ will speak first. Corley Kenna was scheduled to join us, but was dispatched to another project. So JJ, fortunately, has joined us. Then we have Franz Paasche. Franz is with PayPal, and he is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Communications. We also have with us Colleen Vien, the Sustainability Director from Timberland in New Hampshire. And finally, Alexis Bechtol with Levi Strauss. She's the Senior Manager of Community Affairs in San Francisco. So JJ, let me go back to you and tell us, if you would, a little bit of the history of Time to Vote, because this was initiated in 2018. And this year, it's hoping to grow to many more companies. And so give folks a bit of the history, if you would.
Sure. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Bonk, and thank you to Business for America for everything you're doing and for welcoming us into this space and giving us this opportunity to talk to people about Time to Vote and hopefully generate some interest in some more companies out there. Patagonia, like a lot of companies, I'll go back to probably 2014 or so. I used to work in one of our retail stores, and like a lot of companies, I'll go back to probably 2014 or so. I used to work in one of our retail stores. We would always tell our employees on election day, by law, you are legally allowed to take a couple hours of paid time off. At least that's definitely the case here in California, to go hit the polls. And we sort of communicated that around the company nationwide. And that was something that we were following the law, but we also wanted our employees to know that voting was a priority for them. And that came all the way from the top of the company all the way on down. In 2016, our CEO, Rose Marcario, she decided that we were going to close all of our stores, all of our offices in our distribution center in the US on election day in 2016, and that we were going to send a signal to all of our employees and to our customers and tell everyone that nothing is more important than voting on election day. And for the employees, that meant they were given literally the time to go hit the polls. And that becomes really important for folks who work in retail stores or who work on the floor in a distribution center. The people who punch the clock, those are the ones who benefit the most from Time to Vote. It's a little bit easier to make a flexible job schedule if you work in an office, but when people count on you to be on a sales floor, it's a little more rigid. And so we created this accommodation for all of our employees back in 2016 to make sure that work wasn't going to get in the way of them voting. And then we also sent that signal out to our customer base as well by shutting down and making a public announcement about that. In 2018, prior to the midterms, we decided that we wanted to broaden this a little bit. We were going to close our stores again, but we wanted to recruit some other companies. We wanted to make this a little bit of a national push. And naturally, we reached out to some friends we have in the business community, PayPal, Levi's being the two primary friends that we talked to about Time to Vote back in 2018. And we got together with them and kind of said, okay, this is what we want to do. We want to spread this movement called Time to Vote, where business leaders pledge to give their employees literally time to vote in the election. In that case, it was the 2018 midterm election. And the way that companies are required to give that time to their employees is not prescribed. We understand that not every company is going to close all of its stores on election day. Walmart has joined Time to Vote. We don't expect Walmart to close all of the Walmarts on election day. But there's other ways that employers can make accommodations for their employees to ensure that working doesn't get in the way of them casting their vote. So we talked to PayPal, we talked to Levi's, and we did a LinkedIn post and a little bit of earned media around this Time to Vote idea. And we thought maybe this would get 50 companies interested and signed on to Time to Vote. And to our surprise, it blossomed. And we had 411 companies sign up and participate in Time to Vote in 2018. It got about 270 articles around the country. And I say that not that we're doing this for publicity, but that just goes to show how popular this program was. All of the media around it was either neutral or positive. There was no skepticism. There was no negativity around Time to Vote. Everyone that we've talked to and that's covered Time to Vote, they all seem to get it and they understand why this needs to exist. It's a play by the business community to accommodate American workers to make sure that there's one less barrier between the people and the ballot box. The goal for this year is to do a little more than double what we did in 2018. We're trying to get at least 1,000 companies signed up for Time to Vote for 2020. So between now and Election Day, we need a few hundred more companies to match our goal. And we want it to represent every state in the country and every industry. It is totally nonpartisan. You don't have to be a liberal company or a conservative company. If you want to get your company involved, it doesn't matter whether your CEO or your founder is a Republican or a Democrat or something else. Time to Vote is only about getting people the time they need to hit the ballot boxes. And we have lots of resources out there. We have a website called maketimetovote.org where we can help folks, we can help companies figure out different ways to execute this wonderful program.
Great. JJ, thank you. One immediate question I had for you is, as you know, voters participate in Election Day in a variety of different ways, depending on where they live. So here in Colorado, where I'm located, we all mail in our ballots. Other people still go to a physical location. So how is Patagonia adjusting to the variety of options to vote, and how are you supporting employees to cast their ballots depending where they live?
Sure. One of our Time to Vote members, Harbor Freight, they're a hardware store company. They're based here in California, but they have a nationwide presence. And one of the things they've done is they've helped their employees get a hold of mail-in ballots, and they've offered to pay the postage for those ballots. And you could take that a step further. If you're a company owner, you could work with your managers to give your employees time to fill out if they live in a vote by mail state, you could work to give the employees time to fill out their ballots at work. We all know, depending on where you live, your ballot could be several pages long, and there's different ballot measures on there. And it takes time not only to fill it out, but it takes time to study all the questions and all the candidates on there and make informed decisions. That's one thing that we think company owners and CEOs can do, is provide that time potentially on the clock to their employees to do that work. And then if you're in a state that doesn't vote by mail, there's different ways you can work with your managers to maybe stagger employees' work schedules, reach out to your employees ahead of time, see who needs to take advantage of time on the clock to go hit the polls. Not everyone is going to need to vote while they're in the middle of their workday. Some people, if they're younger, if they don't have kids, if they don't have obligations, they can vote before or after work. So you could reach out to your employees ahead of time and see, okay, who needs to have accommodations made so that they can vote, and then work to stagger lunch schedules, or other people can cover for each other. You can have your employees work with each other to make sure everyone can get out there.
Great, good. Thank you. We'll return to some of those topics in a moment, but let me now go to Franz from PayPal. And Franz, thanks for joining us today. And you have a very different business model than Patagonia. So tell us how you have operationalized the Time to Vote program at PayPal, and also what initially inspired you to get involved in this.
Well, let me maybe I'll answer the second question first. And thanks for having us online. It's great to be able to have this opportunity, and I have to give enormous credit to Colleen and JJ and Alexis and Kelly at Levi's and Patagonia, who have really taken the laboring oar on so many aspects. So for PayPal, we've been focused for a while on what's the evolving role and obligation of a company in the current capitalism and in a democracy. And we've thought a lot about multiple stakeholders, who are our stakeholders, and how do we serve multiple stakeholders simultaneously. And it's consistent with our mission, which is to democratize financial services and serve underserved communities and make it possible for everybody in the world economy to be able to move and manage money and to be able to improve their financial health. And it's a very inclusive mission, and it's all about being able to participate in the world economy. And there's a very natural flow to our thinking if you think about what Time to Vote represents, which it's all about participation and about being able to play an active role in our democracy here in the United States. So when we think about our stakeholders, and we think about our policymakers and regulators, we think about our shareholders, we think about our customers, and we think about our employees. And we think we can serve all four categories of our main stakeholders in a way that creates value for all of them. We've prioritized employees as being the first stakeholder that we need to serve, and we put our employees first. And Time to Vote is one of the ways in which we really try to step up for our employees. We have offices and employees in many different states, and we have offices of all sizes. And so in terms of how we operationalize, we've really tried to take it in a bespoke manner for the needs of different offices and populations of our employees. So we have, in some situations where, across all of our offices, we're really focused on communication and making sure people know in their states and in their cities when are the time periods for registration, when are the time periods for early voting, reminding people when all of those dates play out. We look for ways to make it easier to vote on our campuses. So you can have registration sites that are actually on campus if you have a big campus or office facility. We are working on secure drop boxes for early voting, so you can actually, we can help folks make sure that their early ballots are counted. We're even in some places looking at hosting a polling place, and that's a discussion, of course, with election officials. But I think what's wonderful about this initiative is it has a large and I think really admirable goal, and a whole lot of different ways to fulfill the goal that each company can get behind. And I think in an era, and we started the conversation with Bonk's comments about what's happening in our culture with how companies see their role. And I think for companies and leaders, being able to enable participation in our democracy, it fits and is consistent with the way in which many leaders are thinking about the role of companies in helping to address some of the tensions in our society, some of the problems where the private sector really has a role to play. And in a past era, one might have thought this is all government's responsibility to raise awareness, to create notifications, to make it possible. Well, in the current era, lots and lots of companies, including ours, and I think all of the companies whose representatives are on this call, and probably many listening, we know that the private sector has a role to play, and it's an important role. It's a partnership with government and the public sector and with nonprofits. And Time to Vote is a fantastic example of those principles in action.
Franz, thank you for that. I'm curious, say more about the response that you've received from employees around the country. Has it inspired people? Do they feel better about coming to work? Do they really laud the company's engagement in these civic initiatives?
You know, I think the answer is yes, but I think it's also not a surprise to them that we would be, providing these, this kind of communication and this kind of opportunity. So I think that it's one of the ways in which we can engage as an overall community of employees and in our larger community. But I think it's not something that I would sort of put up there as it's a huge moment. It's actually part of how we live as a company. And I think that's part of what we aspire, that this should be part of what feels normal for major companies with large offices. What I've also, really enjoyed having these conversations with my peers and others at other companies, because there's so many ways to participate, and there's a lot of creative employee engagement that can come out of this. And everybody wants to be able to inspire their employees to feel more engaged in their communities and more engaged in the life of the company. So it's, I guess that's the way I'd answer that question.
Yeah, thank you. And then just a quick question on how you go about operationalizing this initiative within the company, given that you're quite distributed and different offices, have to comply with different rules. And, as we talked about, people vote in different manners. So is there a centralized communication approach here, or are you, do different people have different responsibilities to communicate the information? How's that working?
I guess it's yes, yes, and yes. It's we have, our structure here is a corporate affairs structure. So we have in our team, our government relations team and public policy team, our communications team, and our social impact team. And so if you think about it, all three of those teams have a role to play in this. And so we have a widely dispersed capability. So we have volunteers, we have people who are thinking about government relations and the electoral system and public policy all the time. And then we have folks who are, part of our community engagement and site, the engagement of employees at our sites. So we do have a sort of centralized objective, but then with a sort of extended network of volunteers and professionals who feel this is an important priority, and that this kind of participation is part of how we can contribute to our democracy. And it sits alongside all of the economic contributions that we think we can make to creating economic opportunity and empowerment, which also makes an important contribution to democratic institutions if you're helping to address economic inequality and economic opportunity. So it fits with our culture.
Yeah. I think it's a really important point you make about the locus of responsibility, may be centralized or it may be highly distributed. And we've received a number of questions from, companies across the country about, who best to handle this responsibility. So thanks for giving us a sense of how that's working at PayPal. And then also, I just wanted to return to an earlier point that Bonk made. One of the observations we have is that a stable political system, a healthy democracy, definitely generates a more stable and successful economy. So I think you've made that point as well.
Well, and actually, and I think you could also argue the reverse. It's that,
Yes, yes,
actually.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good, good. Well, Franz, thank you. And so I know Levi Strauss has created, a number of different approaches to participate. Alexis, so tell us, how you have operationalized this across the country, given that you have a large headquarters, you have a retail presence, and have there been any challenges to making this work in a company such as yours?
No, I mean, I think this was a no-brainer for us to join alongside Patagonia and PayPal in 2018. There was really this natural uprising and grassroots activism from employees. And when we looked at the landscape in 2018, we decided that the best way to get our employees civically engaged, and one of the most powerful ways, was really through their votes. So we started by registering employees, to getting them out in their communities to volunteer to register others, and really topping it all off with the time off to vote on election day. I think this is what your question is speaking to, but we have corporate offices across the country. So we're in everywhere from San Francisco is our biggest location, to Westlake, Texas, to Eugene, Oregon. So we're dealing with employees in a lot of different states who have fundamentally different ways of accessing the polls, some of which are a lot more difficult than others. And we're also working with distribution centers in places like Canton, Mississippi, and Hebron, Kentucky. And so while Patagonia has set this incredibly kind of high standard for giving all employees the full day off and shutting down all their stores, as a company, we didn't take that approach. But what we did do is, from a corporate perspective, we have a policy in place that employees can take up to 5 hours of paid time off to vote on election day. Our distribution centers and retail employees get up to 3 hours of paid time off. And what we discovered through this, and what many companies on the phone might very well discover in the few conversations that our team has had with other companies who are interested in joining, is that you likely have a policy in place already. It's just about lifting that up and really spreading awareness amongst management, leadership, and thereby your employees, that this exists and that they are encouraged to be active citizens and participate in their democracies.
Right. So Alexis, say more about, within the company, who has to champion this? You mentioned that employees initially inspired the actions, but you also then just suggested that the strong leadership from the top, or at the vice presidential level, is necessary to make this work. So could you say a little bit more about your experience at Levi's?
All of the above. I think when you look at the history of Levi's, we've been around for 150 years, and a lot of the stances that we've taken as a company, both from a social and environmental perspective, have largely been driven by our employees. Leadership takes note of that, and I think that through Time to Vote, when we came out specifically with this announcement, our CEO, Chip Berg, authored a piece with Fortune that kind of set the stage for company-wide. His leaders throughout the company needed to be supportive of their employees taking the time. We've seen that with a lot of different work that we've done and implemented across our employee populations in the US and, quite frankly, around the world, that you have to get direct people managers to be supportive. And so, to get super tactical, we did do a lot of catered communications to people managers specifically, knowing that those one-on-one conversations from people manager to their employee were critical to reinforcing and empowering employees to actually take the time off on election day.
Okay. And do you have a sense that the participation rate in among employees has increased because of your support, and thus more people are actually going and voting on election day? Do you have a sense of that now?
We don't. So in 2018, we didn't do a good job, admittedly, of actually measuring who went out to vote on election day. We have figured out a way to measure that without having to go to the voter files, because you can't access those until a year later anyways. But we were able, through our partnerships, able to figure out how many people had registered or updated their status. And while we couldn't figure out how many people were already registered before, we did see that 10% of employees registered for the first time or updated their status across the country, which we were really proud of, and we saw as really good numbers, especially compared to the national average.
Great. Okay. Good. Thank you. Good. And we'll come back, I think, to some of those topics as well. And let me now turn to Timberland and Colleen Vien. And Timberland has also been involved in this initiative, and has both a retail operation and a distribution center and a headquarters. So Colleen, tell us a bit about what Timberland has been doing and the impact it's had on morale, and maybe also what impact it's had on your brand, in the public's perception.
Sure. Hi. So Timberland was super excited to hear about this movement and this initiative. So thankful for Patagonia and PayPal for jumping into this movement and creating this all for us. For Timberland, it was a no-brainer for us to join. So civic engagement has always been a part of our CSR platform. We have had employee volunteering paid time off for 27 years. So in 27 years of going out into our communities, seeing what the needs are in our own backyards, and then reflecting on how that is all tied to local, state, and federal legislation, our community, our employee community, is always very informed on what is working and what's not working in our communities. And so that, coupled with the fact that we are proudly headquartered in the state of New Hampshire and get to have the fun of the primaries, that is also just a part of the culture where we live, is to be very informed and to be very vocal. So for our headquarters, it's been natural for us to be civically engaged and to always encourage our employees to go out and vote. What the Time to Vote movement did for us was absolutely put our name on the list. We believe in this 100%, but more so, it forced us to have a much more deliberate reflection on how is that playing out for our other locations in the nation, right? Certainly it's loud and proud and evident here in our headquarters in New Hampshire, but what about our retail locations? What about our distribution centers? And then more so even, for me, it was two wins was going to be having a much more deliberate review of how it's operating for Timberland across the nation and our other locations, to make sure that they're equally encouraged to be doing that, but also being a part of the VF Corporation. So we are owned by VF Corporation. They own multiple different brands, and collectively we have representation of 21 different locations across the country, and that's not including the thousands of retail doors that we collectively have between Timberland, Vans, the North Face, Smartwool, and so on. And so the fact that those 19 of those 21 locations are shared locations, they're not just a single brand location. So it was important we're going to really be affecting the shared locations of where Timberland employees are sitting with other VF operations, that we needed to influence the VF point of view on this. And so it was going to be a second goal for mine, was to have VF Corporation join as well, which they have. And it's been really wonderful to see how they have taken on the communications and setting the tone right from the top, with communications coming from the CEO, right from Steve Rendell to every North American employee, reminding them that they have this benefit And it wasn't with the 2018 midterms, but for this time around, this go around, in our time and attendance recording platform, there is now a specific category called time to vote. So it's another way for employees to recognize that this is authorized, this is okay for you to take this time off, and we'll be able to track going forward now how many employees actually use that. We didn't have that recording mechanism in place for 2018, so we won't have the comparison, but super excited about that. And we often, a part of being in the primary state here is we get the privilege of having candidates come through and do town halls, and we are often visited. And earlier today, this afternoon, we had Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado here, who is running for president. And he concluded his time with us in saying that if everyone can just do one thing, and if you can encourage all of your friends and family to have this ripple effect to do just one thing, and that is to make sure that everyone that we know is registered to vote and gets out there and votes. That's all he is asking for, because he believes firmly that the future of our nation is in the hands of the people. And when I learned from the Time to Vote movement that the United States has the lowest voting percentage of the civilized, it shocked me, right? And how can that be, where we are such a nation of leadership and opportunity and vocal? We are a very vocal nation, and yet we don't put that voice to vote. Was shocking to me. So I think this movement is incredibly important. I'm also promoting it as best as I can through industry associations and like the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility, Outdoor Industry Association, American Apparel and Footwear Association. I was just at a panel there earlier this week, and this is something that's really important that we need to get everybody rallying behind.
Colleen, say something, if you would, about, given the attention that that Timberland is directed to time to vote, are you, and this goes back to maybe to Franz's point also, of how important it is for companies to participate in civil engagement and fostering dialogue. Are you finding that employees are talking more about politics, and are they doing it in a more civil way? Because maybe you're modeling certain behavior that that other people are picking up on.
Well, in my reflection of the Timberland community, I've been here for 15 years, and we've had these town halls and we've had the civic engagement from the get-go. I will say that it's been interesting to see the dynamics of the town halls over the course of 15 years. And in each round, who shows up and who doesn't is always also very telling for our employee community. But the questions that come from our employee community in these town halls, and whether or not they're aggressive or whether or not they're really informed, has really, I've been impressed in this last week with the questions that the employees have been asking, because they're really doing their research, and they know specifically, historically, what these candidates have stood for. And that's been really refreshing to see how they aren't just blindly sitting by and taking in what media has to tell you, or even what the candidates want you to hear at first blush. They really have done their research, and just coming from one just this afternoon, it was exactly that way. It was really impressive.
Okay, great. And Franz or JJ or Alexis, do you want to comment on whether the Time to Vote initiative has led to more conversation at the workplace about politics, and is it being done in a civil way?
Sure. Patagonia's, we're not too shy about our political beliefs here, and so I don't think Time to Vote has changed anything about how we operate in that sense. We do isolate Time to Vote from our core environmental activism, And we try to keep those separate because time to vote is intended to be nonpartisan, kind of apolitical. And our environmental activism does unfortunately have to get into some political space, and we've been pretty aggressive about pursuing that when necessary. And our employees, it's always civil around here, but people aren't shy about telling each other where they stand and who they like and what they believe. And that's just part of the culture around here. And so, yeah, it's civil, and I haven't seen anybody get too upset.
So,
Okay.
I guess I'd add, Richard, we've been very clear, in our communications, this is nonpartisan, and that it's all about participation, and that it's not in the context of advocating a particular political view. But I think maybe just to take your question in another direction, this initiative has sparked a lot of interesting conversations internally about civic engagement, in the ESG context, in terms of, how do we think about our responsibilities. It's an interesting how this has led to conversations between and among companies and how we think about what our role is. And, we've had, when Colleen and I, first talked about this, I think it was actually at the Aspen Institute, and that led to all kinds of conversations across our peers and other leaders there. Those conversations have continued at other conferences when they're convenings of corporate affairs or communications leaders. We all have a network of peers, and this has become an interesting part of the dialogue as to what are our responsibilities, what are our obligations, and what are the things that companies can do as part of their, evolving mandate in our democracy and in capitalism overall.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it is really evolving, right, Franz? I mean, this a few years ago, this was not a topic that many companies focused on, and increasingly it is. So is that your sense?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it goes to the point that all of us are making, that our employees have higher expectations. I think our communities have higher expectations. If you look at some of the data on trust and who employees are looking to take leadership, CEOs, company leaders, companies really have a role to play in stepping up on some of the big societal problems and issues. And I think there are greater expectations, and it's a profoundly interesting time to be doing the work that we do at major companies right now.
Right, absolutely, yep. Good, so JJ, let me go back to you for a moment and walk us through some of the mechanics. So, let's say my company thinks this is a great idea, but I need to socialize it a bit, and but I'd like to sign on. What do I actually do now?
Sure. First thing is you need to get approval from the head of your company, whoever that is. And so whatever that internal process looks like, we have found that a lot of these conversations have started at the human resources level or the corporate affairs level or the public relations level, public affairs. There's a few that kind of the usual suspects where these ideas sort of percolate. And then those folks need to send the idea up the flagpole and eventually get approval from the head of the company. Mm-hmm. Once you have that approval, you can go to maketimetovote.org, and there's a button on the homepage where you click to join, and there's a questionnaire that you fill out, and you certify that you have the approval of your company to join Time to Vote. And once you fill out that questionnaire, it comes to the Time to Vote team, and we then vet it on the back end to make sure it's authentic. And we have a whole process that goes through, but it's a pretty quick process. It only takes us a couple of days to turn it around. And then assuming everything looks good, you get your approval from the Time to Vote team, and you get a login for the website, and you'll begin to get our monthly communication. which has some news and updates about what's happening with the movement.
Good, and that may take a few weeks, JJ, or longer?
The approval process only takes a few days. The communication comes out, right now it's been once a month. We're trying not to overload people with communication, but there's an email on the website. If someone has questions and they're not hearing from us, they can email. It's info@maketimetovote.org.
Okay. JJ, we've talked a little bit about, and I'd be happy for the other speakers to weigh in as well, about trying to create some communities of interest across the country. So for instance, here in Denver, there are a number of companies that are interested in time to vote. So I've been chatting with them. And we're also very active in Pennsylvania. And there, it's interesting, we have found that there are a number of companies that have been providing time off for their employees to participate in elections for, in one case, 15 years, another case, a dozen years, but they're not members of Time to Vote. So we've informed them of this program, but they also said, we'd be happy to get out and champion this cause. So is that something that the leadership of Time to Vote is thinking about? And if a company really wants to get involved in their community, is there a way for them to do that?
Absolutely. The Time to Vote is designed to be as democratic as possible. And when you go to the website, maketimetovote.org, you don't see Time to Vote sponsored by Patagonia, PayPal, and Levi's. We've sort of extricated ourselves and made it so that it's about everyone. So when you go to the Time to Vote website, you see the logos of several of the member companies, and we rotate those logos out on a weekly basis to spread the love. So it's not about any, few companies that are really pushing this. It's about everyone. If people want to go out there and evangelize this and help grow this movement, that's great. And yeah, a lot of companies have been doing this anyways. It's the law in a lot of places, but there's strength in numbers. There's a lot of employees don't know that they have these rights already. And if the company joins Time to Vote, that sends a message to that employee that their leadership, their CEO, their executives believe that voting is important, and they're going to be supported by those people. And like Franz was saying, company leaders have a unique role in today's society where you tend to listen to the person who cuts your paycheck, and they have a very big impact over your life. And when they tell you something is important, you're more likely to listen to them than you are to listen to a lot of other people out there in the media or in politics or wherever. And yeah, there's strength in numbers with this. That's why we want to get at least 1,000 companies on board and get people, even if you already have all these policies in place, join Time to Vote anyway. Send that signal. It helps other companies want to join this.
Great, good. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, and Bonk, let me turn back to you to, offer your thoughts a bit on Business for America's involvement in this project, why it's important for our work. And yeah, please go ahead.
Sure. Well, we see an opportunity for business to do more than Time to Vote. We are thrilled about the program and excited to promote it. And we see that as the first and most obvious step of engagement on the issue by looking out for your own employees, figuring out how to gauge them and get them excited. And of course, there's a clear ROI there when your employees are more excited and they're proud of the company they work for doing the right thing and helping to make the world a better place. So we see this as a kind of ladder of engagement, and we're here to help provide additional opportunities for businesses to make an impact. Now, some of those things will be around elections themselves. I know that we've got a number of partners and friends out there in the world that want to help businesses do other activities like voter registration or providing ballot information in a nonpartisan way. But what comes after that? We see businesses having an interest in promoting civility, whether that is, civility in the political process and civility in the office. And we've got partners on that. We are looking at reforms at the state level that will help support that voice that employees have and make sure that they can be heard. Some states don't have easy access to the polls. And by providing easier access, we can make sure more Americans and more voters don't have to choose between a paycheck and voting. So in addition to that, we've got our state level work. And so we are talking to lawmakers, we're talking to businesses, and we're building coalitions and for each state, there's different work to be done. Some places it's pretty easy to vote, and some places we've got a lot of work to do. And when the business community weighs in, when they use their voice to advocate for positive outcomes, we see results. And so we're really excited to partner with everybody on that. And I should say it, if you'd like to get in touch with us, info@bfa.us.
Great, good, thank you. Here's a question from Carly. She says, at Levi's, how did you guys decide on a 3-hour and 5-hour commitment? How can we determine whether or not the allowable time is fair?
Hi, that's a good question. So admittedly, the 3-hour policy was in place already for retail employees. And if you look state by state, there's actually already laws in place as to how much time employers are required by law to grant to their employees. For the 5 hours a month, that there was a lot of back and forth on that specifically. And many of our locations, you can do mail and ballot. And we looked at how long it takes to get to the polls, and just, honestly, by way of continued conversations, we came up with the 5 hours and felt like that was sufficient, and we didn't hear feedback to the contrary. So I don't have a perfect answer, a beautiful answer as to how that came to be. But I'd be happy to continue that conversation offline with anyone who's interested.
Okay, great. Franz or Colleen, you want to comment on the amount of time that's provided? Anything to add there to what Alexis noted?
No, I mean, we don't have a set number of hours as Levi's has set. I think it's really determined at each location, what's appropriate, what's the voting opportunities, what's the process for that each location, and it's determined by HR at each location, what that would look like. So it varies, but it's definitely not a one size fits all. That's the best part.
And I think that's a really fair point too. I think the messaging that we provide is all around really enabling our employees to take the time that they need. So if an employee needs more than 5 hours, we welcome and encourage those employees to have that conversation with the manager and the manager to approve that time. So it was just kind of a baseline, but could vary office to office, retail to retail location.
Right, okay. Good. Let me ask another question, which we've heard a good bit of. Is this program only relevant to large companies? Can you be a small business and participate? Can you be a restaurant and participate? Does the size of the company matter here?
I mean, I guess I can just add, and I think JJ made this point well. The power of this is that we can really make a difference at scale. And so it's really to bring together a full community of companies who are going to, take this step to support their employees. So, I don't think anyone is outside of the community. We've focused to some degree on larger companies because it affects more employees. So, and that it's to the extent we want to have, we're aiming at 1,000 companies this time. It's a high ambition, but to also think about how we can, how we can really enable millions upon millions of people to have more access to participate in the electoral system. But I don't think that there's any reason that small companies or businesses shouldn't be thinking about, getting involved and taking this on. I mean, small businesses create most of the jobs in America still. So.
Yes, agreed. And JJ, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd add that, I mean, the smallest companies in Time to Vote have one employee, and that's totally fine. And when I talk to small companies about joining Time to Vote, and sometimes they'll push back and say, we only have 3 employees. I say, that's great. That just makes it so much easier for you to join. And then like Franz was just saying, we have been targeting a lot of the bigger companies, we have Walmart, we have Target. Those are gonna impact a lot of people, but the small companies are just as important to us. And I think of Michael Bennett speaking at Timberland today, and that's a big employer in New Hampshire. But I also saw a picture of Michael Bennett a few days ago in one of the newspapers, and he was in someone's living room talking to probably 5 people. And the candidates, they know every vote counts. And with Time to Vote, every vote counts.
Right, great. Well, JJ, that is a great way to wrap up. So thanks for summarizing that. And thanks to all the panelists. We really appreciate your time here today. And remember, if you're interested in getting more information, you can visit maketimetovote.org. And also, if you'd like to learn more about Business for America, you can contact us. Our website is bfa.us. We had a number of business organizations across the country who helped promote this Business for Social Responsibility, the national organization. We have the North Carolina Business Council, the New Jersey Sustainable Business Council, New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility, Florida for Good, Colorado Good Business, Social Venture Circle, Business for a Better Portland, and Portland, Oregon. So we thank those groups for helping spread the word. And we hope to do more of these. So anyone who has a suggestion about working in a particular community, we're happy to hear that as well. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the afternoon and great evening. Thanks.